as Maryam says, welcome to Peterborough. These are all our friendly faces, and it's actually so nice to see everybody. I haven't seen everybody in a while, so it's really neat to see everyone. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time. The Peterborough Chamber of Commerce and the Kawartha Chamber of Commerce and Tourism have been working extremely hard along with our federal, provincial and municipal elected leaders and our community partners to make sure that businesses have the information they need and provide feedback to government. That has been very important through this process as the number of programs have been coming out. And we've done it through a variety of methods, including hosting this particular evening. So thank you very much for joining us. For updates on government programs, what's open, resources for recovery, and a lot more, you can check out our chamber websites at peterboroughchamber.ca and kawarthachamber.ca. A few meeting notes before we get started. Everyone on the call outside of the ministers and myself, I'm Sandra Dueck, by the way, I'm the moderator for this evening, will be muted. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. They covered a wide range of topics and, as usual, show the varied impact that COVID-19 is having on businesses throughout Peterborough and the Kawarthas. We were accepting questions in advance because, as mentioned, we have Minister Joly until about 6:45, so we want to make sure we get through. And Minister Monsef, sorry, there she is. I got to move my screen down. So we want to make sure we get through as many questions as possible. And as I say, we had a lot of questions. So we would like to thank the Honourable Melanie Joly, Minister of Economic Development, and the Honourable Maryam Monsef, Minister for Rural Economic Development and Women and Gender Equality, for joining us virtually and answering these questions from our memberships at the Greater Peterborough Chamber of Commerce and the Kawartha Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. So we all know that we're in unprecedented times. We have not seen this before. The government has been announcing a number of measures to respond to COVID-19, and things are moving very quickly. So Minister Joly, please start us off with a broad overview of what the government has announced to date in support of businesses. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for this introduction. Hello, everyone. It's great to see all of you. And it's great also to be on the same Zoom as my colleague that I appreciate a lot, which is Maryam Monsef. You folks may not know, but Maryam and I are really good friends, and I've worked with her on the Canoe Museum for years until it was announced, and she was a very strong defender. She has always been of her community, but also really of rural Canada as well. And so it will be a pleasure for her and myself to just have a conversation, take questions, and really look into what are the issues and how can we find solutions for business owners and all of you. So if you see what we've done, so I would say very quickly, there are three parts. The first and foremost is obviously the importance of protecting health and lives of Canadians. So we've been making sure that we can follow science and really that people can follow the advice and expertise of our public health authorities. Now, in order to do that, people need to be able to pay their rent, their mortgages, and put food on the table, which brings me to the second priority, which is having a people first approach. And that's why we came up with the CERB, the CERB. That's a $2,000 benefit. And that's pretty much the EI system that we decided to expand. At the time, 2 months ago already, we didn't have time to create new programs, and we had an entire public service that was teleworking. So we used existing programs and we expanded the definition of EI. And so that's why we came up with this new approach with a series of other measures, the Canada Child Benefit being increased by $300, the GST payments also. Some of you may have received checks in the mail from the government. So different measures to really target people And then thirdly, we came up with our economic response. At the beginning, I would say that what we saw as a federal government was much more a movement in demand. And why do I say that is we were convinced that, for example, businesses wouldn't have necessarily revenues for 1 month or 2 months, and therefore we needed to support them through liquidity to deal with their cash flow and reduce their fixed costs. But what we saw is that we had to move from only an approach being based on providing liquidity to a subsidy approach. And that's why we came up with the wage subsidy, which is a measure that I can take any questions about. Also with the CEBA account, so that's a $40,000 loan for small businesses that includes a $10,000 forgivable. We came up also with rent relief and also more money to the BDC and EDC to help provide liquidity. And finally, we're coming up with funding, and I'll be announcing details very soon about funding for FedDev, which has an office in Peterborough, but also to the Communities Futures Organizations, which is present also in the region. And definitely this will be to help businesses that are falling through the cracks, that don't have access to the CEBA account or don't have access to wage subsidy. So this is where we're at. And at this point, I would just love to take questions and have a conversation with all of you to hear your perspective and tell you what, where we're at in terms of the economic response at this point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We'll jump in with our first question. It's been predicted that many global companies will begin to rethink their global manufacturing strategies and become more motivated to reshore their operations. Will the federal government be supporting these initiatives? And if so, how can smaller rural communities play a role in these reshoring efforts?
Well, I think there's different things. I think for certain things, for certain sectors, there will be much more reshoring. And why am I saying that is I really have in mind the now famous acronym, which is called PPE, the personal protective equipment. And we know that we can't depend on other countries as much as we did before the pandemic. We will have to create a new supply chain, which we did during this the context of this pandemic. And I know that businesses in Peterborough have been part of this new supply chain of retooling and creating, manufacturing gowns or masks or even ventilators. And Maryam had the chance to advocate for them. That's certainly something at the federal government we're looking at. We've just created a task force also to make sure that it's not only for now, it is for the future as well. We've provided funding to these companies. We've made sure to really go ahead with contracts, and we're working with Ontario to then send the equipment that was built in Canada. So by Canadians for Canadians. As for the other types of industries, I think it will really depend. And Canada is a country that really depends on exports. We will have to defend an international rule-based order based on the fact that we can have access to the US market. We can have access to other countries' markets. That will be really, really key for us. And finally, I think that we will have to continue to support our local businesses. We will have to make sure that we help people that have really good ideas and help them grow. As sometimes liquidity can be much more difficult and maybe banks will be a bit scared to take risks. As a government, we will be there for people to make sure that they can have access to funds. That's definitely my role and Maryam's role through FedDev in order for them to grow their companies.
Sandra,
Maryam, are you going to jump in on there?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Melanie, I'm grateful that you're here. And of course, to all the wonderful people who joined us, first of all, thank you for all the ways you're hustling. and working so hard to keep your workers and your businesses going in this difficult time, and already thinking about what's next. We've had hundreds of conversations with you, and you know, one of the things that has become clear is among those who are experiencing significant strains, not just financially, but also emotionally and mentally, it's small business owners like you who have put everything on the line. And you know, every step that our government's taken, it's been listening to you, it's been responding to you and working to keep you strong. You've heard the Prime Minister say it over and over again. You've heard the Minister say it today. We are going to work hard to make sure that we make it through the pandemic and that you continue to be an important part of our economy on the other side of this. When it comes to PPEs, as Melanie just said, this is a highly competitive industry now and will remain so. And the Supply Council that was set up, this is going to help advise the Prime Minister and our government around everything from transportation to, you know, how to strengthen a resilient supply chain for things like masks and gowns and face shields and, you know, the sourcing and the shipping and the distribution strategies. And absolutely, rural communities and small communities are part of the solution. Communities like ours are well poised. Among the many assets we have are Team Peterborough, so the Chamber and Peterborough Economic Development. I see Rhonda's here, Terry Giles, Sherry from the Kawartha Chamber, the folks at Community Futures with Gail. These are folks we have regular conversations with, and people like Rhonda Barnett are already helping to do a few things. They're tapping into our strong manufacturing history and chains. They are organizing us, they are mobilizing us, and they are delivering results. And the most recent success story that Peterborough's seen is with Harco being able to produce face shields so that we meet the needs of our own community, of our own country, and get ready to export because the demand isn't going away. So I guess the rest of the country, to answer your final question, Sandra, the rest of the country has a lot to learn from Peterborough's approach to this. We are just getting started with the organizing, mobilizing, and delivering, and there's a lot of opportunity for us beyond the pandemic as well.
Wonderful, thank you, Maryam. So our next question is around employee retention. So is there a plan to assist businesses with employee retention past the current June deadline for businesses who will not be able to reopen right away due to the nature of their organization? How will you help businesses that operate using unique revenue models and may only see the effects of this crisis in a few months' time? Most of the programs require businesses to show significant loss right now, but this excludes businesses that will feel the pain later on.
Okay.
Minister Joly.
Thank you, Sandra. That's a good question. That's something I've been hearing a bit around the country, particularly for more seasonal businesses. And I'm the Minister in charge of Economic Development, but I'm also in charge of tourism. And I know that this is an issue, particularly for tourism operators, hoteliers. And I know that lots of people in Peterborough live off of the fantastic tourism experiences that you guys have the chance to offer. So that's something we're looking at. This will all depend on also what is the Ford government's plan as we're reopening the economy. So as we're moving ahead, whether businesses will be able to open or not. And so that's why if the pandemic and the continues, and if there is a need to continue the lockdown, we will adapt. That's what we've decided to do since the beginning. We've launched some programs. Sometimes they were not perfect. We decided to tweak them, and we decided to further, basically always better them. And so that's what we will be doing. And so I hope this brings a bit of comfort to the people that are preoccupied with the fact of having access to the wage subsidy. Now, that's the first part of my answer. My second part would be, if you have an issue right now and you're preoccupied right now, you don't have access to liquidity, or fixed costs are too high, and therefore you can't have access to wage subsidy, go and talk to your FedDev representative. that's exactly why we've increased the funding at FedDev. And so I think that can also help businesses in Peterborough and in the region to have access to funding and basically help go through this very, very difficult time and deal also with the fear of the future and anxiety, as basically there's still uncertainty.
Great, thank you very much. Further along those lines, what is a business's responsibility to bringing back employees who have been temporarily laid off and refused, or they've asked not to come back to work when called to return to work? Some concern with employees that say they want to, they'd rather continue to receive the EI or CRB than return to work.
Well, I think that a lot of what we're hearing, and I'm having a lot of conversations with people in the manufacturing business sector, and Maryam was alluding to the fact that there's a very strong manufacturing base in Peterborough, and the country knows that, and we're certainly aware. So we've been talking to a lot of manufacturers, and definitely, and what we're seeing from surveys is people are preoccupied with what will be their work setting when we reopen the economy. And so do they have access to PPE? Will they be able to physically distance from their workers, for their co-workers? Will there be enough testing? So these are the things that we're working on. And I think it's more that than the issue of the CRB and the $2,000. I think that it's really fundamentally, how can we keep people safe as we're starting again the economy? And I think that people on CRB know very well that the CRB, the $2,000 amount per month, is will end at some point. That's just the reality, because it is linked to the pandemic. So they want to keep their job. They want to have access to good jobs, but they want to be safe also while going back in their workplaces. So that would be my comment. Okay. Maybe Maryam, do you want to add to that?
I think you captured it well, Melanie. Our first priority is safety right now. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and we're providing Canadians a $2,000 guaranteed income every month to make sure they can meet the basic needs. And we're providing some relief to business so that they can keep their employees close and retain talent, which was already a challenge pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, the world of work has just changed, and telework becoming more the norm is highlighting the need for high-speed internet, for ensuring that people have the tools to succeed in the world of telework. And those tools don't just include broadband and access to devices, but also skills. There's also recognition in Minister Joly and Minister Ng, our Minister for Small Business and Export, both recognize that for the entire country to have gone through the unprecedented crisis that we are in the midst of, for us to think for a moment that we can just go back to normal when this is all over without tending to people's well-being and mental health, given some of the trauma they're experiencing, is short-sighted. So the Prime Minister announced, investments in telehealth, the Wellness Together website that is providing direct support to Canadians. We have to be really mindful of those hard skills and tools and programs, but also the humanity involved in all of this. Small business owners are parents. They have parents of their own. Their kids are home right now, those who have kids, and they are going through you are going through some real stresses, and we are mindful of that. And every step that we're going to take to help support you in the retention of your labor, in building the right processes, in PPEs, in doing business differently post-pandemic, it will be informed by you and those who advocate for you. So, you know, for all the stress you have, know that we're not going to move ahead with things without taking into account your realities.
Thank you very much. Is the Canada Summer Jobs Program application going to be opened up again as the new funding for the program was announced a few weeks ago? Or how is that process going to work, given that you were starting to let people know if they'd received their funding when COVID-19 started?
So yes, we announced new funding, we announced a new approach, we reopened it, but I think since how this program is administered, it's really based on the local MP. I think Maryam can definitely answer that question.
So the Canada Summer Jobs in Peterborough to date has supported, 1,200 plus jobs for young people, over 100 businesses, and the program for this year is closing. We have gone from 50% support to small business to 100% now, and there will be hundreds of jobs coming. That said, beyond the Canada Summer Jobs Program, which I know is something that our community relied on heavily because of Trent and Fleming, the new support for students, the grant that's come forward, it's a guaranteed income to students, but it also is meant to mobilize some of the best talent we have in our community to step up and fill in the gaps in our community right now. So those of you who have youth councils, those of you who have access to youth networks, whether you're charitable sector, nonprofit, social profit, or business, call in, as a community, we can mobilize students, call upon them and ask them to come join the fight against COVID. Their community needs them right now. Their country needs them right now. The federal government stepped up and provided them with a living wage for the time being so that they can pay the basics. But beyond the Canada Summer Jobs, we have an opportunity to mobilize youth in our community through the wage, through the grant that we've put forward.
Great, thank you very much, Maryam. We're going to turn to rent relief programs now. So the wording for the rent relief program states small business tenants and landlords would each be asked to pay 25% of the before profit costs. So what does before profit mean to a landlord who has no mortgage? And I believe there's some details forthcoming on that piece. As well, you can explain that. And if the business revenue is down 80%, but again, the landlord has no mortgage, what are some of the programs available to those businesses?
Okay. So as you said, this program is, the details are coming out soon. This program will be, so it's based on an agreement with Ontario, and it will be built through the CMHC. So really, and it will be also a forgivable loan. So it will be for 97% of real estate in Canada has mortgages. So for owners of buildings, it will be through the mortgage that you can have access through your bank that will have a contact with the CMHC, and basically you'll be able to have funding through that. It is applicable for businesses that own their own buildings, and it is for businesses that are, for businesses that have mortgages. And for those that don't have mortgages, I think it's worth it that you flag it and that you tell us we're still trying to find ways to get to people that have buildings but that are not mortgaged. I think also that we're fine-tuning our approach with the Ford government as we're looking at the, the approach as to what is, after profit. This is something that the Ford government wanted to go ahead with. It's not the case in other provinces in the country, so we have to, basically we're still in negotiations on that point. At the end of the day, what we want is we want landlords to be able to go ahead and reduce rent to people. And if a landlord is also, you know, a tenant, well, the idea is to make sure that they can have access to a reduction through the support of the federal government and the provincial government. So that's the idea. And we want to roll out that program mid-May. So, you know, we're already the 4th of May. And so we will be announcing really quickly the details. So I think, Sandra, what I can tell you is from the moment we get the details, we'll make sure that we send it to you, and then you can send it to your members, because that will be helpful for them to know exactly what are the criteria.
And to follow up on that, we've had a few folks ask us if there's any intention for this to become a mandatory program. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, so that's why does it seem so complicated of going through the CMHC? Because at the federal level, we had a problem because we're not in charge of, we don't have the jurisdiction over the relationship between tenants and landlords. It's really a provincial issue. But what we were working on is how to reduce fixed costs. And so that's why we came up with a wage subsidy. And then after wages, what's the biggest fixed cost is usually your rent. And so that's why we went ahead and did a very creative approach, which we never did, through the CMHC to find a way to fund this. Now, it is up to the provincial government to say, okay, well, you know what? There needs to be, to enforce a bit more the jurisdiction over landlords who are not necessarily collaborative and that don't want to reduce rent. I had the chance to have a good conversation with my counterpart, my colleague Lisa McLeod, about that. And I don't know where they're at this point, but I think that definitely having an approach where there's moral persuasion and then maybe a bit more would be a good thing. And I think they're definitely, my colleague is in good faith and looking at different scenarios, because we need landlords to cooperate. At the end of the day, what's best? To reduce your rent by 25% and keep your tenants, or not to do it and lose your tenant? Any business person will see that scenario 1 is better than scenario 2. So that's why we came up with this approach.
Great, thank you. Maryam, did you want to jump in?
There are landlords already in our community who, even before we announced the partnership with the province on the wage, on the rent subsidy, were already offering relief. And if there's any of them on the call, thank you. There are also elected officials from various orders of government on this call. I see Dave Smith, who is, I think, on the law playing hockey. Mayor Andy Mitchell of Selwyn is in a room somewhere. Mayor Tarian has a cat as her display photo. I see Councillor Vassiliadis in a room somewhere. And I know that Councillor Acapo was among those on the line. We are all working together on this effort right now. Our success as politicians depends on it. But the thing we all care the most about, which is the well-being and the vitality of our community, depends on it. The rent subsidy will also apply to charities and nonprofits as well. And as Mel said, the 3% of landlords who don't have a mortgage, Minister Morneau and his team are actively working on a fix for that.
And, you know, I think lots of landlords want to go ahead and do it. But you know, as the minister in charge of defending entrepreneurs and business owners, I'm mad when I see landlords not cooperating. And I know Maryam is, and we're all at. And so let's make sure that there's enough pressure to make sure at the end of the day that people do the right thing and reduce the rent.
All right. Next question. Our business has a few commercial tenants who say they do not qualify for funding loans because they do not have a payroll and only have 1 to 3 employees. What sort of options are available for these small business owners?
Yeah, so we saw this. This is the issue sometimes of sole proprietorship. And so because there was an issue with the SIBA account, the $40,000 loan, what we decided to do is to do it through FedDev. So I'm coming up with the details. I'm the minister in charge of FedDev. I will be coming up with the details very soon. But the idea is to make sure to offer the same types of conditions as the SIBA account would, but through another organization, which is FedDev. So it's basically providing another tool to businesses to be part of their toolbox. So we've seen this gap, and so we decided to address it, and that will be through the regional development agency called FedDev.
Okay. And so
Sandra, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Because I'm able to ask questions, no?
Go ahead.
Perfect. So do people know FedDev?
Yes, I would say we know FedDev, more in the form of Community Futures Peterborough, who's done an excellent job in our area. So yes, so I think Community Futures would be a little more familiar to folks in this area, but they've also accessed FedDev funding as well. Because
there's a FedDev office in Peterborough, and there's also a Community Futures organization. So we've increased massively their budget, both of them. And so I know that somebody from Community Futures organization is on this line. So thank you for your work and dedication. And money is coming, but more work is also coming your way.
All right, thank you. I'm going to switch to tourism because I know we have a lot of tourism operators on the call right now. What is your strategy for the tourism industry post-COVID-19? Can you share your thinking on how the industry can be revived and what the government will do to support recovery?
So I've been having a lot of conversations with the tourism sector all across the country, and I know this was a sector that was going so well just before the pandemic, and we can be extremely proud of it, and we want to support it. I wanted to give you a bit of what's going on here in Canada, but around the world. I had the chance to talk with the G20 ministers of tourism now 10 days ago. And so as of now, the international tourism sector is down 45%. And at the end of the summer, we think it will be at 70%. So we know that there's a problem, and we know that we need to work together to improve and support more tourism sector. I think that what Canada will be doing, and all other countries in the world will be doing, is first and foremost support local tourism, for people going to local attractions bit by bit as things are moving in the right direction, and we hope there's not a surge in the virus of the virus. Well, we'll go much more in regional tourism, and then eventually we'll go national tourism, and then eventually we'll go international. This will be done in steps, and we will adapt our marketing approach for sure. But meanwhile, what we'll try to do also is to be there to have the right approach for the sector. So I think my word to you, tourism operators and tourism leaders, is if you don't have access as of now to the existing measures, the wage subsidy, the SIBA account, please go to see FedDev and the Community Futures organizations to provide you with liquidity. And that's the idea. And bit by bit, as we see the impacts, and we'll see how the provinces and Ontario is moving to reopen the economy, we will adapt. So I'm very much aware that the wage subsidy is a challenge for the tourism sector because of the seasonal reality. But I think it's worth to have a conversation as to what's the best scenario to see in the circumstances.
Okay, great.
And I know by the way, Maryam raised that question with me and with many of our colleagues. So she is very much attuned to the reality on the ground.
I will pass along a note that we have in the chat that a business that was not yet 2 years old had some concerns about access to FedDev funds because of the time that they've been in business. So I don't know if that's a point that you can take back, and if there's a way to talk about how that can happen. And I know that gentleman was also asking about heavy equipment leases and capital projects for tourism resorts as well, and operators in helping with some of their capital projects. If they aren't going to be open, how can they do things to prepare for when they can be?
Yeah. So I think at this point we're getting there, you know, where we would just try to be as broad as possible in terms of our measures, and we're identifying the gaps. This is definitely a gap we're identifying. And so for the first question, which is a business that is younger than 2 years not having access to FedDev, I've heard about the startup issue and startups, particularly in the tech sector, and I think we've dealt with that through IRAP and Futurepreneur and other programs we announced. As for the fact of not being able to have access to FedDev, loans, I take good note of that, Sandra, and I'll check it out with my officials. That's a very good feedback, actually. And for capital expenses and all, I think the most important thing is definitely liquidity, because basically you have to be able to deal with the expenses. And so I think in that context, FedDev and Community Futures program can definitely help. Now it depends on the size of the business. If it's a small business, it's a mid-sized business and larger business. So we've dealt with small businesses as of now. We haven't dealt yet with mid-sized and larger businesses because we thought small businesses was our, and the issue with liquidity was the main thing we wanted to address first. We're coming up with measures for the mid-size and larger businesses in the coming days.
Okay, great. And I did want to ask a question about going forward. And what are we going to, what is the thought from the government around moving forward when we're talking about supporting SMEs after we're on the road to recovery? We've mentioned before, maybe they're not feeling it, but what is the end of 2020 look like into 2021? Crystal ball, please.
The trillion-dollar question, Melanie.
Exactly.
Can I take that?
Can you just tell me what's going to be, what it's going to be like in a month, please?
Are you looking at the environmental side of things? How do we look at, moving forward? Okay.
Of course, I understand the question. I was in business before being a politician. And what I know as a business person is you are always looking for certainty because you're dealing with risks. And you want to make sure that the future is brighter than it actually is right now, like in the present is right now. So I understand the anxiety and the willingness just to see, so what's on the other side of the bridge? What's the shore like? So I would say that we see as a government a three-phase approach. The first one is we're still trying to stabilize the patient. They're still bleeding. And so when you ask me the question about, okay, well, a business less than 2 years old doesn't have access to FedDev, that's important to me as I'm developing the new details of the program that we'll be releasing very soon. So we're still in that tweaking, mode because we launched many programs and we were building the plane as we were flying it. The next phase is to land the plane. Making sure that we will be reopening the economy, but it will be in phase. And certain sectors will be in a different mode than others. You can't compare construction, for example, to hospitality, two different realities. Manufacturing to, you know, the reality in the schooling system. So it is very different, and we will work with our provincial counterparts to deal with it bit by bit. And then and that may last for a couple of weeks and maybe a couple of months. And then it will be the question of restarting the economy, but it will be all very much dependent on how we deal with what we're dealing with now, is basically offering the right measures to businesses to deal with the fact that no revenues are coming in. Will we have to stimulate demand in construction? Well, before the pandemic, the construction sector was going well? Maybe, maybe not. Will we help the tech sector to bounce back? It was a priority before. Of course, we want to make sure that we can help the tech sector that was booming in Peterborough before then. So, you know, I think that what I've learned from this, and I think we're all learning from all this, you know, physically distancing, is we take one day at a time, and we basically talk to people, come up with solutions. They're not perfect. We're dealing with an imperfect situation, and then we're moving on and going ahead, trying to better things. So that's my answer to the crystal ball question.
If I may, as Melanie said, this is a three-phased approach, and first things first right now is getting through the pandemic, and you know, every single Canadian plays a part in that. We decide how long the pandemic lasts, and I've had this conversation with my 10-year-old niece, and she has a hard time believing that it's going to take a long time. And at the same time, she feels empowered that she and little people like her are part of the solution too. And on my end, in you know, the work that we're doing to connect Canadians to high-speed internet, that was already a priority pre-COVID. We are working to accelerate that pace and to give communities certainty faster. I know Minister McKenna is working and has already reached out to our colleagues across the country, including, I was speaking earlier today with Minister Laurie Scott around our next steps with infrastructure projects for small rural communities, including our own, and we're working to accelerate that pace as well. In addition to that, the piece for this pandemic, which is different than any other recession we've experienced, is that it's hit women the hardest. 62% of the jobs that were lost in March due to COVID were women's jobs. These were jobs in retail. These were jobs in hospitality, in tourism, as well as Mel was mentioning, in social services. So women are losing jobs, and we need to be mindful of that. Of those women who are working, who are employed, they are on the front lines of this. They are the nurses, the personal support workers, they're in the grocery store. They are often low-wage jobs, particularly held by racialized women. We are mindful of that. We also get that women are carrying significant care responsibilities. They were already carrying a heavy load pre-COVID. The load is heavier now with the kids not in school and care for elders. And so that, in addition to the fact that the rates and the severity of violence against women is up, we get that in addition to physical infrastructure, like broadband, like roads, like bridges, we also need to help support women and their families bounce back from this. And that includes childcare. These are conversations we'll continue to have with our provincial and territorial counterparts. That includes affordable housing. Women are the first to lose good housing and the last to gain it. That includes supports for the social sector and the charitable sector. And for all the effective advocates who are on the line right now, a term I'd like to socialize here tonight is social infrastructure. Everything I just talked about, those things that keep our communities together, including long-term care. Social infrastructure has to be part of our stimulus and our recovery, because without it, our economy will not be able to bounce back.
Thank you.
I have a, Sandra.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
So how are banks reacting in Peterborough? Are they lending? Do people feel that they have access to liquidity? Do they, you know, is the BDC present? Does it work? You know, how are things, we've taken decisions at the political level, how are things landing? What's your take on it, and what do your members think?
Our members, we've heard some varied stories. BDC has always had a great presence in our community,
Okay.
and the group of folks that are with that organization work extremely hard to make sure that they're helping people as much as they can, and directing them if they can't. They're very good at that, so very solid. I'm seeing in the chat, we're getting some comments to your question as well, that Kawartha Credit Union has been amazing, and that doesn't surprise me either. So yeah. I think from what we've heard from our members is that yes, there's been help. There was a lot of uncertainty at the beginning as the programs were rolling out, but it feels like that has subsided a little bit. But if I would encourage anybody that is on the call that has had challenges to let us know, let Maryam and Melanie know, because I think it's important to help make sure that the programs are working.
Good, thank you.
And I see we have gone over our time a little bit. Do you perhaps have time for one more question that I think about the tourism industry? And I know a lot of our tourism operators in this area have connections to the United States, and there's questions about how that will work with the border. And so perhaps you can expand on that a little bit.
So I think we can be proud of how we've been able to deal with the border issue, let's put it that way, in the sense that we wanted to do something in partnership with the American administration, because this is always how we've dealt our relationship between the US and our government in Canada. So we know it's closed until the end of May, and we will be looking at our public health official advice. So that's what I can tell you now. And that's why I alluded to the question beforehand of local tourism to regional tourism so that's what even other countries are doing. And so I think more and more people can reach out to other communities across Ontario and potentially other provinces around. I think that's something definitely people should be thinking about in Peterborough. And quite frankly, I can't wait to go and see you guys.
I think that's true for a lot of people, being able to see people again.
And obviously, as soon as we feel that it is safe to open the border, we will open it, because we know that it's more complicated to keep it closed than to keep it open for economic reasons and for just the reality of personal connections to the US that so many of us have. So that's the idea. I have to jump off because I have another Zoom. And I know this question will be asked because I'm going to talk to Niagara folks. So people in Niagara Falls. But basically what I wanted to tell you is thank you for being on this call. Thank you, Maryam, for your leadership and friendship, and you know I love you. And also, Sandra, let's make sure that in a couple of weeks we can organize this again to see how things are evolving. What are you hearing? How are things landing also? And to make sure that we can address some of the issues that some of your members may have. Last point, two last ones. If the Chamber of Commerce has an issue, with the details will be coming up through the FedDev program, please feel free also to contact FedDev and Community Futures organizations, because we will be there for a non-for-profit sector that is doing economic development, because more than ever, your work, Sandra, is fundamental to your members, but also to us, to the government, because more you're able to organize people and their interests, more we can react, and vice versa. More you're able to provide us a way to talk to them, to explain what's going on and get feedback, better a job we can do. So,
thank you.
And finally, last point is, folks, the economy is based on a lot of direct data: supply, demand, cash flows, EBITDAs. You all know that. You're in the business sector. But when you look even at our financial markets, a lot of it is based on emotions and confidence, consumer confidence. And so my message to you is, we will be there to support you. We're your allies. We want to make sure that you succeed, that you survive this really difficult economic crisis, but at the same time, that you can eventually succeed and grow. And let's make sure that we're confident in the future, that we know that the future will be brighter. And let's make sure that we are there to support you, because you can be extremely proud of what you do. And we are definitely extremely proud of what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us this evening. And please say hi to the Niagara Chamber folks for us.
Melanie, thank you so much. Mel, I want to thank you for taking the time, and thanks to everybody who joined, and of course to you, Sandra, and the team at the Chamber. As my colleague says, this is just the beginning of the support. We'll be with you every step of the way. Crises like this tend to exacerbate existing vulnerabilities and cracks in our foundation. They also highlight the strengths of any system. And among the many strengths that have been highlighted, you know, the healthcare system we have, the amazing sense of community we have, is the strength of the business advocates and community leaders. We have a weekly call for elected and non-elected leaders to stay in the loop, to coordinate our community efforts. That is one of the many strengths that will help carry us through the pandemic and beyond. Don't wait until next time Mel joins us to get in touch. My team and I are here to serve you, and please don't hesitate to reach out. And to folks from the Peterborough Yoga Wellness Center, thank you, Laura. I hear you, and I'm going to get my team to reach out to you and see what we can do.
Wonderful. Good. Well, thank you again, Melanie and Maryam, and everybody on the line. And it sounds like we may have an opportunity to do this again. So thank you, and everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.